Okay. I did. Yeah. Okay, guys, thank you for, I loved, I almost hate breaking in because you guys are definitely having fun. I don't know if you're answering all the questions, but you're definitely having fun. So, okay, so I wanted to go over a brief review from last week. Hang on a second. I need to jump to the next slide here, so excuse me. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, okay. So somebody's asked, we really have, okay, so there aren't, so if you guys don't vote except in person, okay? Do vote, but only do it in person. And what you need to do is you need to take your ballot with you. We have a voter guide for Santa Clara County on our website, vac.org, vac.org. Make sure it's right up there. But what you need to do is you need to take your ballot with you that they've mailed to you. You go in and then say, I want to vote in person. Do not give them your ballot until you write canceled on it. Otherwise, they will vote for somebody else magically. So make sure, or you can fill it in the right way. So if they reuse it, it gives you a second vote. And then you surrender it torn up or can't say canceled, I think is better. And then you can then vote physically at the booth. And you want to go as soon as they're open, which I think is in the next few days. So, but somebody asked, are there any voter guides for other counties? Unfortunately, the VAC is located in Santa Clara, and so we focused on Santa Clara. So I don't know of any other counties, but there used to be other groups like iVoter Guide, Christian Voter Guide, but when you go there, they really have nothing about the local details. It ends up being, here's what the state voting guides are and all that. So unfortunately, there isn't any. What that means is you need to start a VAC in other counties, right? And we will help you do that, in fact. Which brings us to, we have a special guest here today, Pastor Brandon Johnson, who is also a radio host, and he has asked that we be on his show today for about 5 minutes. Somewhere after, once we get into the Q&A, we'll do a break. He'll announce us. We'll go on there, and then I'll let him figure out how he wants to guide the show for the next 5 minutes, and we'll be on the show. So we'll see how it goes. It'll be fun. Either way, it'll be fun. So. Okay, so I wanted to jump into a brief review of last week. Some of you guys had not, some of you guys weren't here last week. So let's do this as a Q&A thing. Where do rights come from? God. Why is God the only person who can give us rights? Anybody remember that? He made us, but what is the... He's the only moral what? There's another word. Authority, thank you. He's the only moral authority over us. He's the only one that can tell Hitler and the Jews and the slave owner and the slaves that they all have to treat each other equally, because he's the only one who has authority over everybody, right? So that's why only God has the authority to create laws and insist everybody's equal. So all rights come from God. Okay. Does the Constitution give us rights? No. Do we have constitutional rights? No, right? The Constitution actually is a list of negative rights, right? And there's some argument about the past, the amendments after 11, do they actually give us rights? I think they are worded wrong. In fact, there's a danger if you think the Constitution gives you rights. So the Constitution is a list of negative rights. It tells you what the government cannot do. Okay, so what's the difference between a right and what are the something else? Like, is healthcare a right or is it what? What is healthcare? Goods and services. Healthcare is goods and services, right? So how do you tell the difference between goods and services and rights? Goods and services are what? The product of what? Human labor. Goods and services are the product of somebody's labor. So you have the right to own a gun, but you're not entitled to a gun. You have to what? Buy your own gun, right? Because that's a good or a service. So healthcare, you have a right to pay for healthcare. Nobody can stop you from paying for healthcare, but are you entitled to free healthcare? No, because that's a service, and if it's a service, where are you going to get the service from? Because if you say, I have a right to healthcare, then where are you going to get it from? Are you going to capture and kidnap a bunch of doctors and whip them until they give you healthcare? No, but instead what we do is we capture and enslave all the population and take 30% of their income and force it to pay for other people. So we take 30% of their labor, to give goods and services to people who haven't earned it, right? So this is the thing. So but are we mean-spirited? Do we not, first of all, does that mean we should never have taxes? It's a trick question in a sense. The answer is we should never have taxes. Instead, what should we have? Fees for government work, right? We should have fees. So in other words, you drive a car, you pay a fee for the road. You have a house, you pay a fee for the police. You pay a fee for the sewage. You pay a fee for the fire department. But those fees are proportional to what you need. You have a bigger house, you pay more. You have a bigger truck, you pay more, right? And since my friend Dylan is here, he drives a truck. So he pays more for his truck. He has a big Mongo truck, right? He pays more for it. But then how does he get his money back? He charges more for his services, right? So when he charges you more for his services because he has to pay for those fees, you end up paying for it in your shipping or whatever you're doing, right? So it all works out, but right now what's the government doing? They're taking those fees and those taxes and they're paying for people who haven't earned it. And government is very efficient. How efficient is government? Not at all, right? So which is more efficient, governments or charities? Charities. How much more? Do you guys remember? It's like it's like 6 times more, 600 times. So it's not only 100, it's 600 times, right? Right? So the best way to go for taking care of the poor is through charity. So that was a summary of what we did last week. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let me ask you this. What is the job of politicians? To steal our money. Thank you. To lie to us. What are they supposed to do? Serve how? By doing what? We call them lawmakers. We call them legislators, right? So the job of politicians is to make our laws. And, I need somebody to, there we go. Let's go. To make laws, right? So, now, understand this. Can the governor make laws? No. Why? Because he's not elected or appointed. What is his job? His job is to execute administer the law, right? So the governor cannot make laws. And so if the governor makes a law, there's a small window when he's allowed to make a law for 30 days. And did you know that in California, he's not allowed to make a law, he's only allowed to relax a law. The Constitution of California says the governor cannot make law, he can relax an existing law. Why? Because if there's an emergency, he can say, okay, you don't need to do this. You don't need to pay your taxes, or you don't need to do that, but he can't create laws. So that's the Constitution. Why? Because we don't get to elect a governor very often. Who do we get to elect often? Legislators. How often do we elect them? Every 2 years. So the Constitution is designed that the people who actually make the law, you can change every 2 years. Because they're the ones and they are personally responsible to you. It used to be that, there was only about 3,000 or 30,000 to one legislator. Now it's 300,000, right? So it used to be where, you could walk down the street and yell at your legislator because he lived next door to you. You can't do that anymore, and I think we should go back. I have a theory that that's the way we should go back. We should go back to every 30,000 people should have one legislator in Washington, and they should meet in a stadium, right? Good luck trying to sway that audience. Good luck trying to bribe every one of those guys, right? That's the way it should be. Good luck trying to lobby every one of those. We have what it is. We have 300 million people, 30,000, whatever it comes up. I mean, that's a lot of people, right? It's like 10,000 or more, 100,000, whatever it is. I have to calculate. I haven't sat down and calculated it. But anyway, so that's the way it should be. Okay. Now, did you know that the senators used to be not elected by the public, right? The senators what was the job of the senators originally? They were supposed to make sure that the legislator didn't do anything stupid. And so they were accountable to the governor and the House, the local capital, right? So they were elected and appointed, and they would go to Washington, D.C., and if they try to pass something stupid, the governor will say, don't let that happen because that's stupid, right? Because it's going to cost us money. But then in 1913, along with the Federal Reserve, they decided they wanted to make this a popular vote, and they moved it back. So now the state itself has no representation in Congress. Right? The state, it was supposed to be 50 states had representation. Originally 13 states had their own representatives, and then the people had their own representatives. And now that's broken, and we really need to go back to it. We'll talk about that more maybe during the Q&A. Okay, so that's how this is supposed to be. Okay, so now, so the only people who are supposed to write laws is now the Senate, by the way. So all laws for taxation have to come from the House. The Senate actually is not supposed to write laws. It's supposed to stop laws, but now they're also writing laws, and so now they have to negotiate and reconcile, which is all really stupid if you think about it, because really all the laws should come from the House, and the Senate can ratify it if the states allow them to. We're not there anymore. But, okay, so if they pass a law, what is the purpose of their laws? Let's go. God gives us laws. Why did he give us the law? To protect us, right? The law is there for a purpose. What is that purpose? Obviously, that stop sign is not there because somebody didn't want you to have fun, right? When I was younger and working for AMD, there was a really cute security gal working at one of the desks at AMD. And one day I was talking to her and I said, hey, you should come to church with me. And she said, no, I don't need that guilt. And I said, guilt? I said, I don't feel guilty when I go to church. She says, all those rules and regulations, I don't need that. And I thought about it. I said, well, actually those rules are for a reason. And she goes, yeah, to make me feel guilty? I said, no. I said, the rules are there so you don't feel guilty. She goes, how does that work? I said, well, imagine the stop sign. Let's say you ran a stop sign and you killed somebody. You'd feel guilty for the rest of your life. The rules protect you from hurting others, and they protect you from hurting yourself. Right? So the rules are there to protect us. And the more we follow those rules, what? The more we obey God's laws, the happier, healthier, and safer, mutual, prosperous we will all be, right? So here's a question. Now, if God gives us a law, does it apply to just us or to everybody? Right? So God's laws are for everybody. And if everybody obeys God's laws, will they be happier? Yes. Right. So if our nation writes a law that violates God's laws, will we be better off or worse off? Worse. So now the question is, we have politicians who make laws that go against God's laws. Who do they damage the most? Who do they damage first? So we've got all these bad laws. Who do they hurt first? And who do they hurt the most? The rich and the wealthy? No. The poor, right? In fact, you can go throughout it. As Dylan is wearing an EBLM shirt, stand up and show everybody. So EBLM is the organization I started that is the counter to BLM. It's the antithesis of BLM. It's a non-Marxist free market alternative. And I was interviewed the other day, and somebody said, what would you say? And when we know African-American communities are under plight, right? The literacy rate is 18%. They've got, massive, I don't know the exact number, but huge numbers of them are incarcerated. 72% of them are in fatherless homes. So somebody said, what do you think is the biggest cause of why the communities are in the area? Black plight is the word we use. And I said, you really want to know? He said, yeah. I said, the government. There is not a single thing you can point at that is bothering it's not racism, it's the government. Okay? The government has interfered and has bothered them and has broken them. Why? Because they've created bad laws that have hurt them. And one of the first laws that hurt them was the welfare law. And what's interesting, I don't know if I mentioned this before, I think I have, but I'll say it again. One of the worst things that they did is they brought in where if you don't have a father in the home, you get more money. Now, that sounds loving, but it really is, one, it's against God's law because the government's not supposed to provide charity, the churches, right? But what happened was the one party, not to be named, went after the black community to get them to vote for them. And what was very interesting about it is they knew that the way to get them into dependency was to kick the father out of the home. So I was in Chicago just a few months ago, and there was a lady there, African-American lady, about my age, and she, and I was talking about this. She said, you know what? I need to tell you a story. She said, my aunt and my mom would get, back in those days, the social workers would come to the house. My mom and my aunt would get regular visits from the social worker, and she would try to argue them into kicking their husbands out because they would get more money. She said, in fact, I remember my aunt having arguments over the phone with the social worker because her husband didn't have a job at the time. She said, just kick him out. And in fact, one of them said, you should just hide his shoes. So at least when I come, because they had to visit, I won't see his shoes, and then I'll say there's no man in the house. You get bad laws, you get pain and suffering. And as a result of this, 72% of African Americans have no father in the home. Before the 1970s, only 22% had no father in the home. Okay, so bad laws lead to this. So now the question is, if we know that, is our job just to come and minister to them? Or as a Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, let me show you, I skipped this slide. So let me talk about divorce and family, right? So let's take one bad law. Now, I'm not here to condemn anyone if you've had divorce. We live in a sinful society, in a broken society, so things happen. But I want to talk about why Jesus hated divorce. Jesus said God hates divorce, right? So let's understand the consequence of divorce, right? So children from broken homes account for 29% of all kids, yet they account for 70% of all long-term prison inmates, 60% of rapists, 75% of teens charged with murder, 70% of violent criminals, 80% of those motivated by displaced anger, and 75% of all juvenile criminals who are a threat to the public. Right? They're also 40 times more likely to experience child abuse. Okay, children from broken homes are 3 times more likely to fail in school, 3 times more likely to require psychiatric treatment, 3 times more likely to commit suicide, twice as likely to end up in jail, and twice as likely to be a juvenile delinquent, and twice as likely to be a pregnant teen. Now, if you look at if you break down the families of divorced and kids and families without a father in the home, right? You will see that almost 80% of all children in poverty will be out of poverty if the parents had been married and stayed married. Okay? Now, and it's worse, it's a self-spiraling cycle because children of divorced parents are 200% more likely to divorce when adults. I had somebody come up to me after I did this and he said, well, your statistics don't work. I said, why? He says, well, I grew up in a broken home and I'm fine. I said, 70% of people who spout statistics don't understand what statistics mean. And he said, what? I said, that means 30% do understand. So if I say 70% of the kids have this tendency, that means there are 30% that don't have that tendency. Right? And he said, oh, okay. I said, look, you're great. And then I also talked to teens. I said, just because you come from a broken home doesn't mean that you're doomed to this. Right? It does not mean that. It just means that you have to understand that you may have a tendency to do that. You need to fight against it, and you are in the right place. Now, the question is, when no-fault divorce happened, then sadly signed by a man I respect, Governor Ronald Reagan of California, was the first no-fault divorce. And he signed it because his first wife, dragged him through the courts, because back then the only way you could get a divorce is if you accused somebody of abuse. Well, the idea was if you did no-fault divorce, then people will stop accusing other people of abuse. Well, I can tell you that has not stopped. In fact, right now you can accuse a man of abuse in a home and do a temporary restraining order, and you can lie about it, and even when it's revealed that you've lied about it, you are not put in prison for lying to the judge. Okay? So it doesn't change anything, because sin is sin. Okay, so now look at all these things. I was once talking to a guy, and he was arguing. He said he was a fiscal conservative, but not a moral conservative. And I said, "Oh, you're a fiscal conservative." I said, "I have a slight problem with that." I said, "I don't think you can be a fiscal conservative and not a moral conservative." He said, "Why?" I said, "Well," and I gave him a few stats, and I said, "Look at all these things: crime, suicide, vandalism, welfare, murder, drugs, gangs, psychological problems, education, and poverty." These all are what costs us so much money in our government, but are these fiscal problems? I mean, you can count those dollars all you want. But this is a moral failure, a moral breakdown in the family. The family has been destroyed, and this is the cause of all those things. Now, knowing that, should we just be binding their wounds? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian who was executed by Hitler, he said the church's task is not simply to bind the wounds of the victim beneath the wheel, but also to break the wheel itself. So how can we as a church continue to let bad laws be made if we're not going to stop the bad laws and replace them with good laws? Right? Okay. Now, So what is politics all about? Politics is all about making laws. That's why we have governors, and that's why we have lawmakers. But here's the problem. You could have good laws, but if you have a bad governor who doesn't enforce the law or doesn't administrate it correctly, then you don't have anything. So you have to have top to bottom. And you can have all those are good, but if you don't have the judges, then you still have a problem, right? So you've got to have the whole ecosystem. Now, I've had people come up to me and say, well, Neil, you can't legislate morality, right? Now, those of you guys who've been through this this class before, when we did a whole thing on legislating morality, remember that? So when somebody says it's wrong to legislate, if somebody says it's wrong to force your morals on me, what do you say? Remember? If somebody says it's wrong to force your morals on other people, you say, is that your moral? Why are you forcing it on me, right? So can you legislate morality? Because, of course, when you legislate morality, you're forcing it on other people. So the question is, can you legislate morality? I had a friend once. He was actually, we worked down the street right here in Cupertino. And he had a PhD from Stanford, very smart guy. He and I had like 3 patents together. I was talking about abortion because I had to do this paper called How to Argue Against Abortion Without Using the Bible, because I believe in the atheists should be pro-life, right? They may not have a foundation, but they should be, and I can make the argument for them. So we would go through the paper, and we're arguing about it, and I get to, he says, okay, maybe you have a good argument why we should all be pro-life, right? He says, but you can't legislate morality. And I'm ready. We're eating Thai food, right? And I almost choke on my rice. And I'm like, what? What? And he said, you can't legislate morality. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, okay. Can you give me one law that's not based on a moral value? This guy has a PhD from Stanford, remember that, right? Okay, it's in electrical engineering, granted, but I mean, they don't give it to stupid people, right? So he's thinking, and he's thinking, and he's thinking, and so I say, can I help you? How about the law on murder? And he goes, no, that's thou shalt not murder. I said, okay, fine. So he's thinking, and I'm starting to get bored now. I'm like, here's he's thinking, and he's really, he's really, I can see the gears cranking. So I suggest another one. I said, well, what about the law against stealing? And he goes, no, that's thou shalt not steal. And then he says this. He says, you're not helping me. It goes on for a while. Finally comes up with this one. He says, I got one. I said, okay, which one? He says, Mother's Day. Like, Mother's Day? I said, well, that's the 4th commandment. He says, yeah, but the day, that's not a moral value. I'm like, that's not the point of the law, is it? And besides, if you don't respect your mother, is the judge going to come and arrest you and throw you in prison? I mean, come on. So the point is, I said, look, there are no laws that are not based on a moral value. The real question is what? Whose moral value are we legislating? Yours, mine, Mother Teresa's, or Hitler's? And the right answer is, whose moral values are we legislating? God's moral values. None of them were legislating God's moral values, because he's the only one that has the authority to tell us what the moral values are, right? And then, of course, that leads into, well, which God, right? Well, if you say which God, that's why we get into apologetics. We have to prove which God it is. It's the God of the Bible, right? Okay, so we can and do legislate morality, and we impose it on all others. Okay, and then, of course, we get to the big one. Jesus wasn't involved in politics. So I was once teaching this class at a church, and it was back in the day when, kids were... what was the word? I can't remember the word, but they all had, they were dressed a certain way and a certain look, Not hippies, no. It was 1998 time frame. There was a word for them. I think it was, it was not, it was, not even punk. It was something, it was more modern than all of that, but it might have been mod, but mod was 80s, right? So anyway, but it was they were all dressed that way, and they just come in with the lip rings and all that stuff. That it wasn't goth even, because I wish I could remember. I'll come to me, and you're like, oh yeah, whatever. So so they're all sitting there, and I'm doing a talk. This is before I'd done anything, and I was doing one talk about something like this, and I said, so Jesus was involved in politics, and this gal raises her up. No, actually, I didn't say Jesus. I just said something about that. And I said how we should be involved in politics. And she raised her hand up and she said, well, Jesus wasn't involved in politics, so I don't think we should be. And at that point, I said, I need to write a book on this. Right? And my first answer to her was, well, yeah, but if Jesus didn't do something, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And she said, like what? I said, like getting married. Like, oh, okay. I said, and she went on. She's like, he didn't try to change the laws of Rome. He said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar, render unto God what is God, right? And it's funny because the whole crowd goes, ooh. And I said, well, okay, well, let me ask you this. I said, Jesus did not fight against slavery or racism. Does that mean we should not fight against slavery and racism? Right? Obviously not. So just because Jesus didn't do it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. But that's not where we stop, right? The fact that if somebody says Jesus didn't get involved in politics, that is false and a misunderstanding of history. Now, yes, it's true Jesus did not get involved in Roman politics. Why didn't he get involved in Roman politics? Now, remember when we were governing Iraq, right? So could Iraq, yes. He did too. He did. Yeah, actually, with Herod too. Right? Yeah. Go for it.
Luke 3, 13, Luke 3, 14. Likewise, the soldiers asked him, saying, "And what shall we do, Roman soldiers?" So he said to them, "Do not intimidate anyone or accuse falsely, and be content with your wages."
That's good. But the argument was, look. So let's go back to Iraq, right? We're governing Iraq. We're governing another country. Could an Iraqi citizen come to America and get involved in American politics? You all say no, but the answer is yes if they gave enough money to the Clintons, right? Okay, but they're not supposed to, okay? So, great. So they're not supposed to. So in the same way Jesus was governed by Rome, but he was not why? Because the Iraqi is not an American citizen. Was Jesus a Roman citizen? No. So he couldn't get involved with Roman politics. He could get involved with the politics of his country. Rome was governing Israel, called Judea at the time, and he could get involved there. So the question is, did Jesus have senators and representatives? Did he have a law system? And most people forget about all this. Jesus was a Jewish citizen, so he had senators and he had judges. Who wrote his Jewish laws? And if he wanted to yell at somebody or talk to somebody or get involved politically, who would he get involved with? Well, there was one body, and it's called the Sanhedrin, right? The Sanhedrin, meaning sitting together, hence assembly, is the name given to this council of 71 Jewish sages who constituted the Supreme Court and legislative body, legislative making the laws. So they were both the Supreme Court and the legislative body. Now, did Jesus ever get involved with these guys? Did he ever talk to them? Now, most people think, well, he never did talk to them. He never got involved because we never hear about them. But that's not true at all, because who were these guys? These guys were the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And now you see that Jesus was involved in politics on a regular basis. In fact, you can't even preach the gospel without quoting what Jesus said to Senator Nicodemus, his own senator, right? His own representative, his own politician. And he actually admonishes, he actually kind of says, what, you don't understand these things? And then they're also involved politically, using civil disobedience, harvesting wheat on the Sabbath, healing on the Sabbath, and telling the very Pharisees that their interpretation of the law was wrong. You have misunderstood the law. He was lobbying them in a sense, and he was calling them advice. Somebody said, well, this is a few years ago. There was a certain person in office, before this person was in office. There was another person in office that I said some very choice things about him, and I sent it out in an email, and as I'm wont to do, and a friend of mine said, oh, I got this reply. Would you like to deal with him, or shall I? And the reply was, you as a Christian should never, never say bad things or call your politicians names. And I said, oh, so I can't be like Jesus. And the guy said, why? I said, because Jesus called them snakes, whitewashed tombs, dirty, rotten, filthy graves. And he said, who will save you from hell? I mean, he was yelling at them. And then, in case you didn't get this, he called his chief politician, Herod, which would be the executive officer, which would be the president, he called him a sly fox. Now, we think a fox is a smart creature. I grew up in the Middle East, as you know. And in the Middle East, a fox is not a smart, sly creature. A fox is a dirty, thieving, cowardly, sick, disease-ravaged animal that eats your chickens. It's the equivalent of a rat. Jesus was saying, tell that filthy, dirty, diseased, cowardly rat that I will go where I want to go and come when I want to come. So I said, do you think it's okay if I call my politician an idiot? I never got an answer back, so that was the end of that. Anyway, so all to say, my wife says, this is not a great argument to make. I think it's a great argument to make. So, okay, so the other objection I get is this: Christians can't hold non-Christians responsible for Christian moral values. And as you know, I love being on Facebook. You know, my wife will say, honey, come to bed. I'm like, no, honey, somebody's wrong on the internet. Well, today, while I was cleaning up my talk for this, I get this. Now, they had a different person up there. I put this guy's face up there. It says, laws based on Christian beliefs should only apply to Christians. Change my mind. So maybe you should tell that to William Wilberforce. Anybody know who this guy is? Some of you do, some of you don't. There's a great movie called Amazing Grace, written by Eric Metaxas. Although I always wish Eric Metaxas had not called it Amazing Grace, because nobody realized that this was the attempt to free the slaves. If he had called it, the attempt to free the slaves, or the way how the slaves were freed, public schools would have sent kids to that movie, but they didn't. So anyway, one of these days I'll mention that to Eric and suggest that he change the name when they make the movie with a new branding. Anyway, so Wilberforce, appalled as a Christian man about the concept of slavery, he worked for 40 years in British Parliament to abolish slavery, and he did so finally in 1807. It took him 40 years. The British government, who used to be masters of the slave trade, now sent their vast armada of ships to what? To stop the slave traders. Here was a Christian man who was not afraid to get involved in politics. Imagine if Wilberforce had said, if God wants to stop slavery, he will do it. Right? He said, imagine if he said, I should just be preaching the gospel to change hearts and hope things change. In fact, look at the rest of the history of change in this country. The entire civil rights movement was brought back by Christians, was brought about by Christians, not only black ministers, but they were joined by thousands of white pastors and white preachers and white churchgoers, Christians who got in the political movement to stop ungodly laws. In fact, the only reason it's unjust, it's illegal to kidnap your wife and force her to marry you is because a Christian decided that practice in Northern Europe had to stop and went to the king and said, this is not a Christian value, we got to change the law, right? Had Christian involvement really failed? Or is it that you just never studied history? Or should Christian laws only apply to Christians, or did you only study history? Now, the only reason kids are not forced to work in sweatshops is because a Christian decided that was a bad idea. And then, of course, we get the argument that Christians should not be involved in politics. And I get this from pastors, and you've heard me say this many times before. Pastor says, I don't think Christians should be involved in politics. I don't think we should vote. Or not very many pastors say, I don't think you should vote. But some people do. Apparently, there was a pastor on the radio that said that. But you really think that? And when a pastor says that, this is the way you should ask him. I say, Pastor, so are you saying that child prostitution is okay? If a pastor says Christians should not get involved in politics, you say, are you saying child prostitution is okay? They go, no, I think you are. Are you saying child sacrifice should be okay? No, I think you are. Do you think that temple prostitution should be okay? How about the unfair treatment of prisoners? Why? And they'll say, well, I don't see the connection. Well, let me tell you the connection. See, all these laws, right, slavery, segregation, against all this, kidnapped brides, child labor, predatory combat, death games, infanticide, child marriage, temple prostitution, child sexual abuse, child prostitution, wives of property, cruel treatment of prisoners, inequality of mankind, and thousands and thousands and thousands of other laws were only changed because Christians got involved in politics. Now, how heartless and wicked can you be to say we should not be involved in politics? And so I copied this list and I pasted it on Facebook this morning. And I said, yes, So you would think all these things should be legal. Good luck with that. And here's the thing. Most of these laws took years and years to implement. And they only came about because Christians took a stand politically, legally, and judicially. And remember, when they took that stand, William Wilberforce, when he fought slavery, he was the most hated man in all of England. The most hated man in all of England. Him and Thomas Clarkson. And don't think that just becoming Christian will change the law. So Roman society turned Christian in 313 AD, but it took 61 years till 374 AD before a pastor, a preacher, a man of God went to the Emperor Valentinian and said, you have to stop and outlaw infanticide. And I've said, well, and I had a friend say, well, you know what, we should just preach the gospel. I said, that's not good enough. So how can you say preach the gospel is not good enough? God, we were told to preach the gospel and make disciples. Is that not good enough for you? I said, no, it's not good enough. I'll tell you why it's not good enough. Because for 200 years, the gospel was preached every week on Sunday and every week on Wednesday in two of the most Christian nations in the entire civilization of mankind. That's the United Kingdom and America. And slavery still continued. How dare you say preaching the gospel is enough? It wasn't until a group of men, Christians, got together and said, we have to stop this, that it was stopped in England. And a group of men and women, actually, not just men, but men and women, got together in America and started a new party called the Republican Party. That slavery was stopped here. I just got in an argument with another guy on Facebook. I love Facebook, right? And this guy says, well, you know, the Republicans of the old days, they were liberals. And now they're all fundamentalists and fanatics. So I said, do you know who founded the Republican Party? Do you know that the first meeting was in a church? Did you know that the three things that the Republicans wanted to stop was slavery, alcohol, polygamy? You think these guys weren't fundamentalists? They're more fundamentalists than they are today. Where did you come up with this liberal? Oh, they were more liberal. See, even atheists should want Christians in politics. Why? Because even atheists don't think slavery, child labor, child marriage, and bride kidnapping should be legal. But here's the catch of all this. Behind every law that we changed, not only is there a Christian politician, but there's almost always a Christian pastor and a church. Take the case of slavery. John Newton, remember the name? He wrote the song Amazing Grace, right? His church, St. Mary's Wilnot, was where William Wilberforce would go to get encouragement. That was where they met. That's where it all started, and that's where it spread around the world. Which pastor will be the next William Wilberforce in our time? Oh, sorry, will be the next John Newton in our time. Okay, I want to quickly go through the render unto Caesar thing, because this is always the one. Okay, so Jesus says, you know, what about the verse that this gal says? What about render unto Caesar, right? So Jesus says, Matthew 22:17, the pastor said, tell us then what is your opinion? Is it right to pay tax to Caesar or not? But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, you hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax. They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, whose portrait is this, and whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. Then he said to them, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, unto God what is God's. Then he said, so let's look at that verse. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and God's what is God. According to that young gal, this means that we should not be involved in politics. So let's first change. Whoops. Got too far. Let's just change Caesar into politics, right? If you think render unto Caesar means involvement in politics, so we'll change the word Caesar into politics, okay? So then he said unto them, render unto involvement in politics what is due involvement in politics, and to God what is God's. Does it say don't render unto politics what is politics? Does anything in this passage say don't be involved in government? In fact, if anything, it says render unto involvement in politics what is due involvement in politics. It's not it doesn't say separation, it says participation, right? In fact, I always say, pastors, if you really want to take that verse, he says, he looks at the coin and he says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. That means you should not be getting that coin that he gave to Caesar. How many pastors want that to be the verse meaning? That means we should not be giving you money from the state. No tithing to you. Because Jesus said, don't give anyone, go to your money with the Caesar's head on it, right? Or Washington's head on it, or Benjamin Franklin's head on it, right? Okay, but who is our Caesar? If we're to insist it means do not give things to Caesar to God, that means don't give the money to the church. Okay, so who is our Caesar? Anyone what did you guys come up with? Definitely not Biden. Why? Because Caesar was the supreme ruler of the Romans. It ends up being the bank. But who should it be? Okay. So the real Caesar is the Caesar. We should be obeying the laws of Caesar. And if we are obeying the laws of Caesar, the closest thing to Caesar is the United States Constitution. Right? And our civil rulers take an oath to uphold the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land. Neither the president nor the members of Congress are Caesar. They don't get to usurp it. Okay, so if anything, it says, render unto the Constitution what is the Constitution, unto God's what is God's. And the Constitution asks you to be involved to protect the Constitution. How do you protect the Constitution? Right? By being involved in politics and not giving up your guns. Okay. I want to, we have the video now. I want to quick show this video. So this is a interesting, Hollywood always messes things up. But when they came to the Lord of the Rings, they actually did a great job. I was quite surprised, right? But then they did The Hobbit, right? And I'm like, The Hobbit is a book that small. Lord of the Rings is that big. So I'm like, and they wanted to make three-hour movies from The Hobbit. So where are they going to get material for it? They had to make it up. I'm like, oh, this has got tragedy written all over it, right? I mean, this is going to be a nightmare. But they actually had some good stuff in it. So this is one scene from Lord of the Rings, from The Hobbit, that I was very impressed by. And I want to set it up for you if you don't know the Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit is basically, there are three or four races in the group. One is the elves. The elves are like the angelic beings. They're equal to angels. And then is men. Men are men. And then they are the orcs and the goblins and all those. And those are more like the demons or the bad people. So in Lord of the Rings, in The Hobbit, which was not in the book, there is a scene where one of the pack of orcs, which are the bad people, invade the elves. Now, the elves have lived for centuries, and they don't want to get involved with men. And they certainly don't want to get involved with the dwarves, because they hate the dwarves, which is another group of man-like beings. So, and the elves are immortal, basically. So they're basically angelic beings. But the orcs run into the elven land, chasing after a pack of hobbits, right, and dwarves. And they steal the dwarves and hobbits from the elven castle. And this is the dialogue that happens when one elf goes to save the dwarves and the hobbits, which they're not natural friends, they're actually kind of enemies. And this dialogue happens. And I think it's very key when we listen to it. Oh, this is the book, sorry, I'll come back to it.
You cannot hunt 30 orcs on your own.
But I'm not on my own.
You knew I would come. The king is angry, Talia. For 600 years, my father has protected you, favored you. You defied his orders. You betrayed his trust. Dangolonanin, Negohenathan.
Uohenathan. Kidad wenithan uohenathanim. The king has never let Orcfield roam our lands, yet he would let this orc pack cross our borders and kill our prisoners.
It is not our fight.
It is our fight. It will not end here. With every victory, this evil will grow. If your father has his way, we will do nothing. We will hide within our walls, live our lives away from the light, and let darkness descend. Are we not part of this world? Tell me, Melilon, When did we let evil become stronger than us?
Okay. This last election was different. I'm going to close here with little hope, right? Lots of hope, actually. This last election was different. But looking at previous elections, we find that there are over 60 million evangelical Christians of voting age in America. Okay? Yet, with that number, and I think it's more now, okay? Because a lot of, I mean, if you think about, I run the VAC, and we've had events at the VAC with 1,800 people. And like when Robert Kennedy came, I would say like 70% of the people were not Christians, but fully on our side, right? When we ran an event with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, right? 1,700 people, 300 Muslims, Uyghurs, right? And at least 600 Buddhists, right? At this event, because it was a free Hong Kong event. Fully on our side, okay? So just counting the Christians, we're at 60 million, right? Yet in most elections, off that 60 million, only 20 million vote. That means 40 million of us don't vote. Adults. Okay? Now, it changed a bit in the last few elections. So I don't know exact numbers, but they've said the numbers are actually worse. Because now there's like 85 million Christians and something like 52 million don't vote. Now, here's the thing. The battle is ours to lose. The answer is sitting in the pew next to us. Now, we go to Calvary Chapel. I don't think anyone there doesn't vote because I beat them up over the head, and Pastor Mike has beaten them over the head enough. I think everybody there does vote. But if you're going to any other church, chances are every third person, 2 out of 3 people don't vote probably. And yet we could win every battleground, every state, every county, every year, except Berkeley. Okay, I grant you that. If we would just go out there and vote. Now here's the other thing. If you look at the history of movements in the past, there's a 3.5% rule. Nonviolent protests are twice as likely to succeed as armed conflicts, and those engaging a threshold of 3.5 of the population have never failed to bring about change. And let me give you one more piece. And if you've played this game with me before, you can't play it again. If I were to say that 17% of the population, only 17% of the population attends church, and a woman in New York is more likely to be pregnant out of wedlock than to attend a church, what decade am I talking about? 1776 to 86 is the answer. He played the game. Or read the book. Right? Because 1776, only 70% of the population attended church. And yet we wrote a Declaration of Independence, and then a few years later we wrote a constitution that has been the most amazing constitution the world has ever seen. And here we are. I don't care what number you look at. We're more than 17%. We're like 24 to 48% of the population is Christian. And we're not voting. Why? Because pastors are saying you don't need to get involved in politics. So now I know God is sovereign. But remember, the children of Israel, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and many other nations, God held them all responsible for choosing their way into destruction. Will he do likewise for us? With our freedoms to evangelize being taken away, will Americans lose the ability to witness? My fellow Americans, it took me 12 long years to become a U.S. citizen, to earn the right to become a U.S. citizen. I've lived all over the world. Some of you know my history. Born in Ghana, grew up in Africa, Ethiopia, and in Africa I was in Sudan and Yemen and Ethiopia, Middle East and Yemen, and then my parents are Indian origin, lived all over the world. But I can tell you, this is the greatest country in the world. And I traveled all over the world as an engineer. I was into China, to Korea, to Sweden, to Finland. But let me tell you this. If we lose this battle, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those with the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening. Ronald Reagan said that in 1960. It's 1962 or so, 64, I think. The government wants control, and you can see that with the whole COVID thing. You can see what's going on there, right? We're finding out more and more of all the lies and all the dangers, right, of the COVID vaccine, COVID, all that stuff. I feel one day in the future, like my father told me so many years ago when I started this talk, I said, I may have to say to my daughter, honey, we have to leave this country because I gave a Bible to a non-Christian, because it's illegal to give someone who's not a Christian a Bible in the United States of America. But just remember, I escaped to come here. But if we lose freedom here, there is no place to run to. This may be the last stand on earth. Thank you very much. Pastor, you want to get us on that call, or? Yeah, please.
I just wanted to ask if any of you heard the message that I heard this week on KFAX radio. I messaged Neil because I was looking for it. It was by Napoleon Kaufman from Wellness Church. Did any of you hear the message on KFAX radio by Napoleon Kaufman from Wellness Church? He specifically said, do not get involved in politics. I'm almost positive he also said don't vote. But I spent hours looking for it because I wanted to have Neil share it today. Did anybody hear it? Nobody heard it? Anyway, well, it was so appropriate to hear. Yeah, I heard it last week. Okay.
Okay, so while Pastor Brandon figures out the logistics, we can go to Q&A. So, and whenever he's ready, we'll just switch over. So, questions? Everybody's stunned. We'll go to question 2 then. Right here.
So one of the questions up there was preaching the gospel. Is that enough?
Yeah.
When we're doing our discussion, I said I think it is enough just to preach the gospel. What was I thinking? It is when you preach the gospel, you're living it, you're living sacrifice, you're walking the talk. So I think if we preach the gospel and we walk the talk, we're living. That's our actions, our example.
Then you would be involved, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
So naturally, I think...
if you extend it, so not even preaching, but living. And also making disciples, right? Because that's, if you think of the whole Great Commission, it's preach the gospel to every nation and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? So that part of it, making disciples, definitely part of it, because you're making disciples, and to do that, you need the freedom. There's a whole bunch of that stuff. Yes, yeah. But it's the question was asked because I've had people say, no, that's my only responsibility is to preach the gospel. No, that's not. There's a lot more, right? Right here.
The aspect of voting, I feel like there's so much more you can do than
voting is just the minimum. Exactly.
So what other things? I mean, especially if our government has been co-opted.
Yes. So
what really is
right now we need volunteers to man the election observers. So if you can, if you're interested in doing election, we work with the Election Integrity Project. Send me an email, neil@noblindfaith.com or neil@vacmail.org, and we will connect you with. We need election observers. Marcy and Cooper did it. I think Monty did it too last year. It's definitely interesting. We need more people like that. That's one. But that's, again, one of the minimal things. The real thing we need people running for office. So one of the things we've been doing is we've been helping SVRW to get people to run for school board. Now, remember, to run for school board, you just have to be over the age of 18, I think. You don't need to have kids. You don't have to have kids in the system. You just have to be living in that district. So if you're a grandparent, empty nester, this is a great time for you to get out there and influence the school boards, right? So run for school board. And most school boards are actually decided by a few thousand votes. So if you're a school board in a district with a good church, like our church, it's almost a shoo-in if we all vote in that district, right? So yeah. And then, of course, run for candidates. And if you can't do that, then help a candidate. So give money work with them. A lot of people don't understand, when you work with a candidate, you're not going and knocking on doors of people who hate you. You're not going to go to a door of some liberal and say, hey, I want you to vote for conservative, because they'll yell at you, right? You're actually going to doors of conservatives and Christians who are not voting in many cases, right? So
Neil, I'm in here. I'm in here right now with Neil Mammon, and we're in the class with a young and old over here at Valley Church. Right?
Church.
And he's teaching a class, and what I love about it, he's teaching civics to all age groups. And I really believe this is an important thing for us to do, is to actually teach the truth to the next generation, because they're the ones that are going to actually be able to change things. We working together, the young and the old. And so Neil just talked about how important it is for Christians to be involved in politics, and he's actually doing it by educating people here right now. Neil, you're on live with KSCO Radio, and everybody in the room, you're in live with KSCO Radio over in Santa Cruz. So everyone say hi.
Hey!
Do you guys think that Christians should be involved in politics? Yeah. So Neil, Ron, Neil's here right now, and I just want him to just address our audience for just a moment and just say hi.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great, Neil. It's actually going wonderful now that we're hearing your voice.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome back to Wake the Bear Radio.
Yeah, thanks. It was a while back. So I think the best thing we can do, both as Christians and as people who believe in fair government or righteous government, is we got to convince the Christians to vote, and one way is to talk to our pastors. And I think the right way to do it is, the argument I find most effective is, if you run into a pastor, or you talk to a pastor and say, Pastor, do you think that child prostitution should be legal? And the pastor will say no. And I say, well, do you think slavery should be legal? And the pastor will say no. Do you think that wife kidnapping should be legal? The pastor will say no. I said, well, you know that those three things, and gladiatorial combat, death games, unfair treatment of prisoners, even cruel treatment of animals, and thousands of laws were only changed because Christians got involved in politics. Pastor, don't you think that it would be very horrible, mean-spirited, and unloving, and unchristian for us to not be involved in politics, because then we're saying all those things should still be legal? And I think that's a great argument, because pastors have never been able to refute that, and they've been kind of dumbfounded. They look at me like, oh, I never thought about that.
Yeah, so Ron, go ahead, Chris.
Is this class a one-night class, or what is it?
Well, it's a week.
How can our listeners know more?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that. So if you go to youtube.noblindfaith.com, we're live streaming it there. It's we got 2 more classes after this. So it's every Tuesday night at 7 at youtube.noblindfaith.com. So youtube.noblindfaith.com, yeah.
Okay, perfect. youtube.noblindfaith.com. And check it out. At least the first hour.
Yeah.
The first hour.
Yeah, or they can live stream it anytime after the event too.
You can live stream it anytime.
Or
even after it's over.
yeah.
So
It won't be live streamed then, of course, but yeah.
Encourage people to go and watch this. Get their pastors to watch it. Get people at church to watch it. You know, one of the things we showed a video at our church recently, we showed the 2,000 Mules.
Oh, yeah.
And I called on Saturday, and I texted a few friends, and I said, we're going to show this, and we had like 35 people show up within a day's notice. So there's a way to start utilizing the pulpit. I really believe that we're supposed to reconnect the church and pastors back to the colonial pastors, because the colonial pastors were known as the Black Robe Regiment.
Yep.
The British hated them because they preached the gospel of freedom, and that would actually affect and disciple the nation that was being founded. And so I really believe that we're actually supposed to be doing that. We're supposed to be doing that. So.
Amen.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
It's good to, I was just saying, it's good to hear your voice. I'm glad you're enjoying that class. If Neil's teaching it, it's going to be a great class.
It's a great class. Yeah, Neil's amazing. So you got to, let's give Neil a hand. He's doing awesome. And I did get my book signed by Neil tonight, why Christians, why Christians should be involved in politics. So you can get that online as well. So.
Thank you, Brandon.
All right,
Thanks for having us.
Good talking to you guys. I'm going to get back in this class because it's really good. So I'll be back. And actually, one of the things we're talking about next week is also we're talking about gun violence. And we're also talking about getting people out and voting. So they're talking about who to vote for. Who's
a good quick thing on gun violence. As horrible as the kids who have died from guns in there, governments have killed over 286 million people of their own because they didn't have guns.
Because they didn't have guns. Yeah.
So that's right. Pick which one you want.
Well, I love the fact that a father and a spouse picked up a shotgun and went and got the kids out of the building when the paid hands were sitting out there
for an hour. Yeah.
So, that's right in the news, I know. These guys are on fire here. You guys go check out this class. All right. I'm taking notes. I'll let you know, guys. God bless.
Okay. Thank you. Everybody give him a hand here. Okay. Question right there, Dylan.
Has everyone seen 2,000 Mules here?
We have. Not everyone.
Haven't you need to watch it?
Yeah, it's definitely something you guys should watch. It's a great movie. It actually shows very clearly that the last elections were stolen, not through Dominion machines, but through ballot stuffing. So,
I want to suggest that not only should we all watch 2,000 Mules, we should all watch Capital Punishment, which talks about what happened January 6th in Washington. We should all watch The Enemy Within, which was done by Trevor Loudon, and we should all listen to the interview with Will Kane with the computer repair person who had Hunter Biden's laptop. And I think those 4 things we should all be aware, but not just not for entertainment purposes, not just to share, to have people in to watch, but to do something about it. There should be arrests made. We should be so up in arms when we watch those 4 things. The Enemy Within, Capital Punishment,
2,000 Mules.
2,000 Mules, and the interview with William Kane and the laptop repairman. And it's a Fox deal. It's on YouTube.
Yeah, and then watch it and then share it because it's very important that people do something about it.
I told people, listen, when I had 35 people watching 2,000 Mules, I said, what I want you to do is now, I want you to commit to me that you will get a group of people at your house and show it to 5 more families in the next 2 weeks. That's how it's going to get out, is you have to actually have interaction. That's why they don't want us interacting and talking, is because the revolution was done over beers at a pub, right? So
exactly.
Get people activated. So.
Yep. Okay, anyone else? Next question. Come on.
Questions.
Right here.
Okay, I think this pertains, but I've heard a little bit about the doctrine of the lesser magistrate from my pastor.
Yes, definitely.
And so can you speak a little bit, like maybe just really quickly?
Okay, so the doctrine of the lesser, it's interesting enough, I had not read that book, and then I was in Florida for CPAC, I think, or NRB or something, I can't remember. And it must have been CPAC. And this lady walks by me, and I'm wearing my EBLM shirt. And she turns around and looks at me, and I think, oh, she doesn't like the EBLM shirt. She goes, Neil Momman? I'm like, yeah? She goes, oh, I love your book. You have to speak at my church tomorrow. I'm like, what? I'm like, what? She goes, yeah, I'm going to call my pastor right now. I'm like, what person can call a pastor and have me preach the next day? I'm like, this must be like a 20-person church. No, it turns out to be like a 400-person church. She drives me down the next day, has me preach there, and while I'm speaking there, the tech guy says, I'm going to send you this book. And he mails me the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates, and I got to send him a book. And okay, so the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates, it's a very short book. It's really easy to read, and I would recommend you all read. But the whole concept of the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates is that if you look at the Old Testament, we'll talk about this next week, how God has set up the republic, right? And there are people at multiple levels who are responsible for everything below them. So even if they're commanded to do something from above, their responsibility is to the people below them. And that's actually how the republic is set up. And so the Doctrine of Lesser Magistrates says, look, if the government sends you a command to execute someone, and he gives all these examples in history, your job is not to obey blindly, because your responsibility is immediate. And if we had the doctrine of lesser magistrates, we wouldn't have had Hitler. We wouldn't have had the Nazis. Because the German soldiers would have said, no, this is wrong, this is false. In fact, there's a great movie that one of my favorite movies actually is Henry V with Kenneth Branagh. Really well done movie. And in the movie, Henry V is about to attack France for a small part of France. And if you think about it, oh, yeah, these British and French have been fighting each other for hundreds of years, right? But in the movie, he walks amongst his men right before the Battle of Agincourt. And he talks to one of the men, and he says, do you think this battle is a just battle? And the soldier says, it is not for me to decide, it is for the king. And the king gets very angry at him. He says, no, if the battle is not just, you should not fight. Right? He knows that if this is not just, then nobody should be fighting. Everybody must be convinced it's just, right down to the soldier at the bottom. Right? And just so you know, in that battle, it's a great movie. You guys should go see it. In that battle, there's 600 Britishers and 6,000 French. And yet the British win. They lose 26 men in the whole battle. And the French lose thousands or hundreds, whatever. And it's because the British had the longbow. So it's a great movie. You guys should definitely watch it. But anyway, so the doctrine of lesser magistrate is that we are responsible for everything below us, even if we're given a bad command from the top. So that's the idea. Anyone else? Right there. 2.
You say it so fast. The doctrine of lesser what?
Magistrates.
Lesser magistrates.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, right behind.
Didn't Gandhi do something like that with his salt march? I mean,
yeah.
The British were preventing them.
So Gandhi his thing was all. So Gandhi was, of course, the emblem of civil disobedience, peaceful civil disobedience. And although there are some limitations to what Gandhi did, and Martin Luther King talks about that when he talks about what Gandhi did. But Gandhi's whole thing was, in India, it was illegal to produce your own salt because the British wanted to tax it, right? So Gandhi said, no, this is not right. We are going to do civil disobedience. We're going to go in. But he was not a magistrate in that sense. He was just a leader of people. And then, the limitation with Gandhi's thing was what Martin Luther King says. If your enemy has, I think Bonhoeffer said that, not Bonhoeffer. If your enemy has a conscience, no, okay, MLK said it, right? I just have to remember it. MLK said, if your enemy has a conscience, do as Mahatma Gandhi. If your enemy has no conscience, do as Bonhoeffer. Because Bonhoeffer tried to kill Hitler, right? So you can see that. And it turns out the British did have a conscience, which is why it worked, yeah.
I know this might sound like an insane question to ask, but do you think Bonhoeffer trying to kill Hitler was technically murder by God's standard or attempted murder?
I would say no.
Okay.
Right? It's a difficult thing for us to see. Let me rephrase it. It's easy for us to see in retrospect because we know what Hitler was doing.
Yeah.
But if we knew Hitler was doing that, then I think we're all responsible to stop that. The difficulty comes when somebody who says, look at the abortion industry, we should stop it by murdering people. That's where the difficulty comes. And, we don't want people to go out and the real reason we don't want people to go out and bomb abortion clinics is because it doesn't work. Okay? It's the worst way to fight the battle. If you really care about the unborn, bombing abortion clinics is the wrong way to do it. The right way to do it is the way that we're doing it right now, right? Yes, it takes longer, but in the long run, it'll be much more effective. Right? Okay. Otherwise, this would not have happened if that was constantly happening. Fred, hang on, grab the mic.
Following what you just said there, then why aren't we trying to stop Putin? He's exactly doing what Hitler did.
Yes.
Day by day, exactly doing the same thing. Why are we sitting here doing nothing?
So because that is a different country, that would apply in our own country, right? But as a different country, then a government is responsible to stop that. And also, I think with the Putin thing, the real question we should ask is it our job to go stop him, or is it the Russians' job to go stop him? We went to stop Hitler because Hitler declared war on us, right? There were a lot of other things we didn't do in Nazi Germany. We had a chance to accept all the fleeing Jews, and FDR did not accept them. We had a chance. There were so many chances we are to save them. We also, while we were in battle, we had a chance of destroying. In fact, what's his name? The famous prisoner begged FDR to bomb the concentration camps. Right? He said, I know my people will die, but they're dying anyway. And if you make it a habit to bomb concentration camps, the Germans will stop having this concentration camp because they know that's the first target. FDR refused to do it. So there were a lot of things we did wrong there. But with Russia, the question is there a military cause to go in? And then you have to go into just war theory. So we talk, are you familiar with just war theory?
No, but I'm familiar with the threat of thermonuclear
Yeah.
war if we don't
Yeah. So
do
if
what he says.
yeah. So if we think that Putin is going to start a nuclear war, then there might be some justification. But then you would say, well, if we do get engaged, then it would cause a nuclear war. So there's a bunch of issues there. I don't think it's as simple for us to analyze here. And then the question is, are we hearing the whole news, or is it right? So there's a lot of question about what we're really hearing. I'm not saying that it's justified what he's doing, but I'm just saying that there's a lot of things we're not sure that it's completely. I don't think he's in the right place. I don't think he should be attacking anyone. The question we can argue is, if it is not an American concern, should American boys go die for it? That's the difficulty I have, right? So, yeah, so just war theory, there's a set of 5 or 6 things that Augustine wrote about way back in 200 AD or 300 AD, whenever he was. And he talks about when is it okay for us to go into battle. And if you follow those things, it's a very good list of when Christians should be engaged in battle. But it's a good thing to look at, because just go look up just war theory. Yeah, it's easy to find. Yeah.
So I just wanted to mention, I listened to a talk given by Victor Davis Hanson on the subject of Ukraine, and he draws the parallel between what is happening between Russia and Ukraine today and what happened between the USSR and Finland back in the day. And I think it's a really interesting talk, and you can find it online.
Yeah, so there's a lot there too. Yeah. I don't claim to be an expert in that. It's just there's a lot of stuff going on. Okay, we are almost out of time, so one last question, and then anyone? Right here, Aaron.
First, I love all the younger people that are here right now. You guys are awesome that you're here. So, yeah. My question would be, what is your idea about the role of education as a solution to what you've talked about tonight?
You mean like public education, private education?
Yeah, and of the youth and.
Yeah. So somebody asked me, should there be prayer in public schools? I said no. They said no. I said, yeah, I don't think there should be prayer in public schools. I don't think there should be kids in public schools. So then you can't have prayer if there are no kids, right? So so that's my view on it. Saying this, that I'm married to a public school teacher. Right? So my wife is a public school teacher. She stopped public school, and we homeschool our kids when the first one sitting right there was born. And maybe she'll go back to be a public school. I think, here's the deal. I think that we should send our generals and our experts and our Navy SEALs into battle. We should not send our civilians. The kids are the civilians in the public school. So I think we should send teachers, superintendents, board members, principals into the public schools. And we should keep our kids home, right? So that's my view on it. As far as homeschooling, I think the statistics show that something like 75 to 90% of all kids in public schools leave the faith. And it's opposite in homeschools, right? And if you're in a private school with that accepts non-Christian students, non-Christian families, the number is also higher that leave the faith. But if you're in a private school, Christian school that only accepts Christian families, then the number goes back down again. So really what you want to be, if you can't homeschool, we understand everybody can't homeschool because you need to have sometimes you have to have 2 incomes, then you can, if you do go to a private school, then make sure it's a Christian school that only admits Christians, because you're not helping anybody by having your kid grow up next to the kid whose father's an atheist and just likes the education, right? Yeah, right. And there's always scholarships. But here's the other thing. So a friend of mine who ran for governor named Sam Gallucci, he has come up with a plan where he wants to start, I think he said 300,000 home schools or church schools in a year, right? And his idea is to use the classical conversation system and have every church host the classes, but nobody is employed by the church. It's a great idea. They're employed they're just paid as tutors to the parents. And they have the, classical conversations, the way it works is you meet all day on Monday or something, and then you homeschool the rest of the day, right? The idea here is you meet in the evening on Monday, so you don't have to give up your job, and then the tutors homeschool in the church the rest of the week. And it's such a great idea because the church doesn't have to have any employees, right? The church doesn't have any employees. You're working with classical conversations people. You don't have to be homeschooling if you don't want to, and yet you can if you want to. So it's a great idea. We're trying to help them get that off the ground. So. Okay, well, I guess we'll do one more question.
It's not a question. I run something very
similar,
pretty much exactly
like
wonderful. That in Santa Cruz.
What's it called?
Visionary Village.
Okay.
And it's a ministry, but it's a private membership association.
Excellent. Yes, a 508, right?
508c1a.
Yeah, 508, yeah.
Which is a really awesome model. But yeah, the parents pay the mentors, tutors directly, and it works really well.
So I should connect you with Sam because he would be very interested in working with you guys.
Yeah, it's been going for 2 years now. So
great.
I could offer
because he's looking for models at work. Great. So afterwards, come talk to me. Thank you. Let's close in prayer.
An announcement really quick?
Oh, yeah.
We have books in the back. Everyone watching online, check the description. There's all the books and stuff there. And yeah,
thank you. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much that you have given us clear guidance. We pray that you will allow us to spread the word and to change this country because we don't want to give up yet. We think there's a lot of future for this country. And we know that every day there are more and more Christians. There are more Christians today in the world than have ever been in the history of the world. 34% of the world is Christian, Lord. We pray that you allow us to continue to grow that, and especially as it's growing in Africa, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Amen. Thank you. See you guys next week.